Penny Cagan and I are going to explore loss data. And Penny has been a pioneer of loss data and using it to turn data into really useful information. Penny started the first loss database. It was one of the first collections of public companies and losses that you were able to spot trends and again be able to use that information to better inform management of where some of the risks were.
So I'm particularly pleased that we're discussing loss events because they're so fundamental to operational risk management. And as you said, it's where I started in the industry. So they're very dear to me. And I do, again, think of them as foundational to operational risk management. The collection, monitoring, analysis, reporting of operational risk events was one of the practices on which the discipline was originally built. So we're going to talk a lot about that today as well. I want everybody to keep in mind throughout the discussion that loss events are sometimes treated as an administrative exercise, but that's truly not what they are. An event happens, someone enters into a system, a report is produced, and everyone moves on. But that misses the point, right? So I think we're going to get to the point today, right, Craig?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just on that, Penny, I just want to say a couple
Mhm.
of things. I mean, when in 1996 we built this whole thing called a triangle approach, and we had RCSA and scenarios or projected risk, and then loss data, key performance indicators or key risk indicators, or actual risk. So that was the actual embodiment of risk, and that to me was true performance, right? And then the last part of the triangle was the audit side of it, where audit would
I love that.
independently look at the whole thing and kind of make sense for management. What I'm seeing in the field, especially amongst the mid-size and smaller institutions, is they're not even using internal loss data, right? So, and you got to question whether or not, if you don't know where you're losing money, are you actually running a business? And to learn from the mistakes. I think one of the things that you brought to the industry really was saying, listen, other people have made mistakes. Go back and look at your own institution to see if you're going to make the same mistakes or are making the same mistakes. So, what are you seeing in the industry, Penny, in today's world as far as the use of internal, external loss data?
Yeah, well, first of all, the people that get it understand that the purpose is not simply to record what happened. It's to understand why it happened, what the control breakdowns were, whether it could happen again. And so it's a very proactive activity to look at what's happened to your peers, for instance. We talk about external data, or even internal data, you look at your themes and trends, patterns. What I've seen in the industry is that it is part of the basic operational risk framework to assess your internal losses, to collect them, and to also assess and identify where peer events are relevant to your own institution. They're not always used as deeply as they could be used in terms of understanding the control breakdowns, the trends, the themes. And even with internal events, I used to like to do what I would call look across to see if the same kind of control vulnerabilities exist elsewhere in an organization. So, yeah, I think a lot of organizations would probably benefit from pushing further their assessment of events. If that makes
Yeah, I
sense.
mean, we used to use it with the RCSA too, because we used to,
Yeah.
again, in the that triangle approach, this counterbalance was you say your controls are fine, but you're losing an abnormal amount of money but in that area. So what's going
Mm.
on? Well, how can you say things are okay when you're getting all these material losses? But on the external side of it, what I found was that it's a really great source of competitive information as well. And when I used to send this out, I used to do it once a month and take all this information and right size it for our institution. The people who actually complained about it when it was late was the salespeople, and that was kinda interesting, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because they were like, "With it because I'm gonna go talk to a client, and I wanna know, do I have an edge on another company because they've had these events occur?" And they would tell the client, "Oh, yeah, that company, this," and the client would be impressed that they knew this stuff. So it was a really great form of intelligence. And again, what I'm seeing in the mid-sized banks that I've worked with and smaller banks, it's been a real challenge to get them to want to undertake this. And I think to your point, it's essential that you have this And I don't know how you go to a board and not prepare them to answer that question, could it happen here?
Yeah. And boards were always interested, and I've done a lot of op risk reporting of the opera's profile to boards, and they're always interested in the big events they read about in the paper and want to know if it can happen here. So I used to track those events and actually selectively bring them to the board after I've done the analysis of what power control we're going to,
Yeah, because it's not imagined risk, it's not
you know, it's
craft,
real.
it's real, and when you look at the things that happened during the crisis, the financial crisis, and you start seeing companies dishing out billions and billions of dollars, that's something that needed to be understood by the other corporations that could be in the same boat. I was working with a REIT out here, and the REITs are pretty clean businesses. We found out that someone who was under the FBI watch for all kinds of corruption, I mean, terrible corruption, actually did business with them. And once we brought that to their attention, they didn't know that. And once we brought that to their attention, the audit committee meetings changed forever.
Wow.
But before it
Yeah.
was just like, yeah,
Mm.
okay, we have to do this. Then after that, it was they started asking a lot of questions, a lot more engagement. They wanted to know more. And I think that's something that people are overlooking today.
Yeah. So the
Working folks.
questions are when you're looking at particularly external data, right? But with external data, the question is, could it happen here? And if it did, what would it look like? Right.
Right.
What would it look like in our organization? And one pain point I found was that when I've worked with op risk departments that were going through external data, they were quick to say it doesn't apply to us because they're a different type of organization, they're a different size, they're in different regions. So unless like the event was specific to a regulator in a specific region, but even then, it could still apply to you. So the question is, could it happen here? And if it does, what would it look like? And you don't have to find companies that are exactly like you, right? You need to
Right.
use imagination. And then the same thing happens, I mean, can be applied in internal data when you do a look across. I mean, if it happens in your asset management division, there may be similar control issues in your wealth management division, right?
Yeah.
That you want to kind of say, okay, first of all, let's look at the controls in a wealth management division. And if this event happened there again, what would it look like for that division?
Yeah. And we used to, at one of the firms that I worked at, one of the banks I worked at, we used to collect the information, external information, obviously the internal stuff too. And then we had a threshold of $1 billion. And there was a soft threshold, though. I mean, if there was something that was more serious that was under that, we could also look at it. But we present that to the risk committee. And then from there, we would decide if we needed to do a deep dive on it. And that helped us be proactive, especially we were under a lot of regulatory stress. We were under a cease and desist order. And I think the regulators appreciated that. But more importantly, internal people, we ended up forming an incident response committee of senior
Mhm.
people in the organization. And by running scenarios based on the threshold of somebody else's losses, we were then able to form a group that when real things did happen, we all knew each other's roles. So I can't stress enough how important that external data view was.
When you're doing things like desktop exercises, scenario analysis, even business resiliency, business continuity exercises. I mean, looking at what's happened in other organizations, how it unfolded helps you kind of think about your playbook and how you would respond.
And again,
Yeah.
having that team
Yeah.
approach is so because in a critical situation, if everybody knows what their role is and everybody's comfortable with each other, then it's a great thing. It makes it so much easier to get things done and to know who to speak to and know who to get to. So, but
Yeah.
that's all from having a methodology around external lost data and bringing that into a governance process.
And then, I mean, internal data as well, I think can tell you, I mean, everybody uses it for when big banks, at least for their stress tests, their stress models. I think there's so many more uses to it in terms of scenarios, feeders into RCSA, as well, feeders into business continuity and resilience planning. And we have, unfortunately, there's some good examples of like current big cyber events that can really help you plan your resilience efforts as well.
Well,
And
also the weather events. I mean, look at
yeah,
what's happening in the world today. I mean, this is something that goes across every industry. And I did for a client, I actually was doing a presentation for them on ESG, which now seems to be a bad word, but a bit acronym. We looked at 1 month of data of things happening around the world. It's a few years ago. We took the month of July. And I think the number of damage from weather related events was somewhere around 83 billion for 1 month.
right.
Right. And when you look, but it's again, people aren't looking at it as a whole. They're looking at it as an individual event, and they're kind of goldfishing it where they forget about that and they move on to the next thing. But when we put it together in one slide or one deck, it was overwhelming. And it really got people thinking about, well, if it happens here, what does that mean? And I think that's all part of the use of external data. I personally, as a risk manager, can't live without it. I don't know how people do
Mhm.
that. And that's why I was curious as to what you were seeing, because again, I've been challenged by, I'll be giving advice to people at the mid and smaller institutions, and they don't want to look at it. And I just don't get it. And I think they're doing a disservice to their boards, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked more with larger institutions
Yeah.
with with their frameworks, but not I mean, there's always room to think about how to use it more broadly than it's being used. And then, of course, there are those near miss events where your heart like stops for a moment to think about, oh my God, if this actually wasn't caught by a control, it was caught by a control, but not right away, but later, a little later than you would have anticipated, or one control failed, but another one caught it. And so those are also worth kind of doing that root cause analysis, digging into them, looking at the controls and potentially remediate them. But I mean, those are also it's not always about actual loss events or you lose money. There's
Right.
near misses that yeah, that stop your heart, right?
Oh, yeah. And it actually, like, I remember when I was students, I worked at the independent valuation group. They pricing evaluation group, they actually reduced the amount of authorized trading that we would have lost if that group wasn't in play. And we ended up losing about 8 million, and it could have been a lot worse if we didn't have that control in place. And that was a direct thing by looking at having that control in place and showing the value of that control. Because I think that's the thing I always searched for that eluded us to most part. I mean, what does a control actually do in actuality, right? And in some cases, you can't really measure that. In this case, we said, well, if that group didn't go check this trader's books, we could have been out, who knows, $100 million maybe. So that definitely paid for itself.
Yeah.
What do you think about AI ability to help us with this?
Yeah, definitely, particularly with data aggregation. I've done a lot of data aggregation in my life and never want to do it again manually. So I think AI is great in terms of data aggregation. I think it's great in terms of coming up with maybe some conclusions that you might have not come up with. I'm a huge proponent of using AI to, and then also help with identifying events. Like if you're doing
Right.
scenarios and you don't have access to the database I brought to market, AI can at least help you identify some events that you can potentially use as inputs into your scenarios and bring them to your tabletop exercises.
Yeah.
Um,
For someone who's listening to this wonderful podcast, what is your advice? How do they start doing this?
yeah, well,
What do you think the best thing to
I
do?
was thinking about that because like there's a lot of like fintechs that are getting banking licenses that need to do probably
Well,
think
trying to
about
get banking license.
it's you wanna have a database. You wanna have a taxonomy. I call the taxonomy the language of risk, right?
Right.
So that you can and it doesn't have to be a complicated taxonomy. I mean, you could take a look even at the Basel high level 7 event types and build it off of those 7 event types. I mean, there's a lot of help out there in terms of taxonomies and I actually have sample ones in my book. If I can take a minute. I
Oh,
have a
right. That is a great
I
book.
I have a chapter on loss event, and I include sample taxonomies from the industry, like ORX, the Operational Risk Exchange gave me some samples, and risk business, and I have some of the Basel samples in there as well. So you want to start with the language of risk with the taxonomy so you can organize your data. And then, I mean, when I started building the first database years ago, I built it from a spreadsheet from Bankers Trust.
Right.
Doug Wolfman, as the insurance guy at Bankers Trust, he was collecting peer events for his own assessment analysis. So, I mean, you can start in using something basic, but then think about how you're going to organize it using a taxonomy, how you're going to report it as well.
Well, I think that's the key thing. I mean, to me, a lot of what we've seen in the industry, and you and I have seen this together, is people doing things without first understanding what the end result that they
Yeah,
want. How
that's
do
a
you,
good, yeah,
how do you design this for the board and then work your way down is how I always look at a lot of the risks that we
yeah,
do,
good.
so that people could understand that this is board worthy and that they are bringing information to the table. Because a lot of times the risk functions might not be bringing that valuable information to get the board insight into something. And I think this creates an incredible insight. And then also bringing it down to the level where everyone could use it, everyone should share this information. I had a distribution list at the institution I was working at that was about 3,000 for my monthly external event report. And a lot of it was people asking for it. And then one of my managers said, "Well, is it really worth it, your time to do this?" And I said, "This is how many people are asking for it." Because once they started seeing it, like I said, it was a competitive edge for them. They like seeing these things in categories that made sense to them, like credit
Yeah.
risk, operational risk, fraud, or whatever it was, and they were using it for their business. So once they create database, they look at designing a board worthy output, for example.
I like your idea of starting at kind of what a board would report would look like and working down, like what categories would you report to the
Right,
board, and where are they asking questions? I know I feel boards are very concerned about fraud, but then thinking about, and I'm talking both internal and external database, like databases and data, like where else can you use it, right?
right.
So again, thinking about operational resilience, your business continuity program, tabletop exercises. I mean, you can walk through a big cyber event, right, from one of your competitors or from one of the big technology firms. There's some interesting AI events that happened in the industry lately with AI models breaking out of their gate,
Yes, and
you
we'll
know.
we'll have another a podcast about
Oh,
that in the future
so
because I
yeah,
predicted all this was going to happen. Just real quick, I don't think we could control something that's smarter than us. I don't think that's ever worked. So
yeah.
we'll save
Well,
that for another day.
yeah, we can talk about AI governance and guardrails and
Yeah,
triggers.
right,
So I would think about where else you can leverage the data and the information, but just collecting it isn't enough. Like you need to think about, okay, what is it telling me about risk? What does it tell me about my controls? Where do I maybe need
right.
to do remediation? Where do I need stronger guardrails?
Do I make investments?
Where I need to make investments? Absolutely, as well.
So I think that's great advice, Penny. And I would say that both you and I are open to speak to anyone. We love this topic. It's something that we're both passionate about. And we just hope people will take this information and be able to build something that will help them manage their risk better.
Yeah.
This weekend is going to be a light week. Of a number one, I'm in Southern California, Penny's in Manhattan, and we're both suffering through heat waves. So I plan on doing a lot of staying in the house, boring stuff like that. I'm also writing something that it deals with AI. Reach out to Penny and myself on LinkedIn. I'm Craig Spielman and Penny
And
Cagan.
Penny Kagan, and once again, do consider buying the
The book is great. Promise you.
book. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.